Today's topic is going to be depopulation agenda. And so we'll look at Malthusianism, eugenics, the precursors to Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030.
Good stuff.
Yep, so just a quick background. Malthusianism will tell us that billions of people need to die for the survival of the species. Eugenics tells us which people out of the populations need to die or need to be removed from the population so that the species can survive. And then the precursors for Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, that's the actual plan that they're going to use to actually carry it out.
Yeah, so we'll try to cover at least all of it or most of it. And also, before we get into it, we thank everybody for all the views, all the likes, all the shares. We really appreciate it. You can support us by going to theiconiclabel.com and purchasing a hat, hoodie, t-shirt, which you see some of them us wearing today. Or you can also go to the
patreon.com/theiconicpodcast and select your level of support. And that kind of takes us into platforms. Which platforms are we on? We're on all the major platforms, and you can find a truncated list of that on Linktree. You can go to who.be/iconic. And other than that, we have a highlights channel. Tell them about the highlights.
Yeah, so the highlights channel is pretty much all of our podcast in somewhere about 8 to 12 minute formats where it's easier to consume. You know, if you don't have the time for the 30 minutes, 50 minutes, 2 hours sometimes, depending on how long the podcast goes, we'll have the shorter versions there. It's easier to share, easier to refer to, and it's just a highlights channel, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And with that being said, I think that's the end of the housekeeping section. And so let's go ahead and show some of the notes. So for this next section, we strongly recommend that you have watched one of the previous podcasts, specifically our last podcast, number 4, The Death of the Nation States, to kind of, I guess, have an up-to-date background on the material that we're going to cover here. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and jump in it. So you can just follow along on the notes. If you're watching by video and audio, you can watch the video portion.
Yeah, if you're only watching on audio, just so you know, we have our notes out. So it's easier because we know some of these topics are very dense and complicated. So we decided to show some of our notes so people can at home follow through or even take notes.
Yep. Yeah. And so let's jump right in. What we're seeing today is this idea of a necessity to remove people from the population, or for the population to be reduced. And if you're thinking that people, if you're thinking of people in terms of their jobs or their usefulness to society, or what contributions that they're making to the society, then that whole idea in this New World Order concept, that whole idea, just like the nation states, is coming to an end. And so we get these ideas that are perpetuated in books like, the book is called The Limits to Growth in 1972 by Dennis Meadows, who produced this booklet for one of our roundtable organizations that we've mentioned before. This one in particular is the Club of Rome, and it warns of overpopulation. And you have this idea that there is no real function or purpose to the existence of what later gets termed the useless eaters of the society. And so the next bullet point here, the useless eaters, what is that? Well, it's a population that's just consuming resources. They're living longer. They're producing more waste. They're growing exponentially against the Earth's limited or finite resources. And so in the book, a case is made for the reduction of the population in favor of a select few. And so those that are beneficial to society, and you get this idea, and this is kind of like the tail end of the last podcast, you're going to save mankind as a species, and to do that, you have to save mankind's environment or his ecosystem. And so we go through the type of ideas that are put forth into the consciousness of the people today. This is why you're seeing a lot of this, what's known as the Gaia propaganda. Save Mother Earth. Gaia is the real virgin that brings forth life. And that kind of is going to get us on some of the Masonic ideas, because, with the Masonic symbolism, you have the compass and the set square with the G, representing, they would say, outwardly, that's God, or generically speaking. And so the G represents the generative principle. So there's a lot of stuff that's tied into astronomy and the celestial bodies and things like that. But that's for another podcast. I don't want to get too much into the weeds there.
Either that or some sexual organs, right? So it's like, it's very interesting when it comes to it. Again, not us what they say that is the aprons that they wear, what each thing, what the pillar is, you know.
Yep.
I'm sure there are people, again, just to give a little bit preview, you've heard of like some of the obelisk, what they represent and all that stuff too, you know. But that's just like kind of tip of it. No pun intended.
No pun intended. Yeah. Those are phallic symbols, and so all that stuff, all the gory details of that will be in the mystery religion section. So. And so you get this idea, at the dawn of the New World Order 2.0, religion is this idea of the secular masses. And so this is the exoteric doctrine that conceals the esoteric doctrine. So outwardly pantheism, while it has all these different flavors, kind of like a Baskin-Robbins, 31 flavors. It's all ice cream, but it's in different for the different palates of the world. But inwardly, you get this idea of Luciferianism is going to pop up, and then within Luciferianism, there's a whole smorgasbord of things that are going to be there too for us to kind of dive into. But keeping with this idea of the two doctrine policy, so things are exoterically or outwardly to the world, Gaiaism or earth worship, pantheism or paganism. So pantheism, all is God. There's no distinction between creator and created. And then you get esoterically, what does the inner circle believe? It's gonna devolve into Luciferianism in all of its different forms. And so with that, you're gonna get Satanism and a whole bunch of ideas that we'll get into on the mystery religion side. And most of that material is going to come either from a lot of it's going to come from Masonic sources, and so that's going to be an interesting piece to cover, right? So and so where we were with this book, Limits to Growth, what is it based on? So they're based on two different people, two different ideas. And so we have Thomas Robert Malthus gives us Malthusianism, and Francis Galton gives us eugenics. And so what is Malthusianism? So it's a population theory that basically says more and more people are born into the world, they consume more and more resources and produce more and more waste products. Far more production and waste than is allotted to us by nature. And so in the 1970s, Malthus advocated this idea that the Earth's resources are stretched beyond the limit or stretched to their limits and can no longer sustain us. We desperately need a major depopulation policy. Now, before we mentioned that the roundtable groups were set up to advise nation states on their public, their what would be called their domestic and their foreign policy. And anytime people have pointed the finger at them, like, hey, it's interesting that, the policies that are discussed in these roundtable group meetings all of a sudden end up being the policies that politicians are passing through their parliaments.
Just a coincidence, Jeremy. You give everything to the chance.
Right.
Just,
And so previously we mentioned Ettore Gotti Tedeschi. What he said about the New World Economic Reset, the New World Great Economic Reset, the idea was to correct the mistakes that were made over the past 50 years that entailed this idea of reducing the population. And he said, because according to the neo-Malthusian worldview, right, that's the useless eaters, that's, you have an infinite growth against finite resources, you're over the carrying capacity of the world. The more people are born, the more people consume, the more people waste, what nature provides for us. Well, all these ideas should be coming together now. So you have Malthus. He was also a eugenicist, and so what is a eugenicist? Well, that gets us into this other character. Before Malthus, eugenics was developed by Francis Galton, 1883, and it's interesting because it means good birth, right? So if you look at the term, and so Galton was interested in improving the human stock, and you get this idea of the Aryan race that's going to come a little bit later. You're going to produce a superhuman, and you're going to do it through genetics. So this is going to be a scientific endeavor, and then you get these movements to these type of people should be the people that are over civilization. They should be making the decisions for humanity going forth, and these ideas are going to come full circle to where as we see today, we're getting characters that are saying that they are science itself, making decisions for,
So, and then also in the previous podcast, we covered the human hacking aspect of it, right? So we have the full, complete mapping of the human genome, and then now we have the technology, like, like they were saying, the technology plus the information, I'm forgetting now. But and we have all the recipes to be able to create this different species that they're going to, again, which we don't know which one are they going to become the different species, or we're going to be counted as the bad ones, right? Yeah.
And so that's, Yuval Harari, who spoke at the World Economic Forum, the ability to hack humans with computer power. And so you're going to get this kind of like scientific dictatorship that he warns against. He's like, he makes this progression. He's connecting different ideas. His last speech that we detailed was about, when the data becomes concentrated into too few hands, society or humanity will split not into different groups or factions, they'll split into different species, right? So and that's that idea of like, well, who's going to be the human and who's going to be the non-human, right? So, or is this like a humanity 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 type thing? And so as we continue here, and so, the eugenics term means good birth. And Galton was interested in improving the human stock through scientific management of mating. And so his goal was to create better humans. Historical connotations tie this to the selective breeding programs, the horrifying concentration camps, the medical experiments, the mass exterminations promoted by the Germans, and the Nazis, in the Nazi regime in World War II.
Clearly, survival of fittest didn't work. That's why you need to do all that stuff, right? You need a designer to go there and design some.
The way that they would put it, we need to help evolution along, that type of thing.
Oh, we reached at the level in our evolution where we can help our evolution. That's what they're saying.
Yes, essentially, right. And so now you put these two ideas together, Malthusianism and eugenics. We can get this systematic plan that's going to emerge. And so the Malthusians, they tell us that millions, it's billions now based on the Georgia Guidestones, right? So that millions have to die to save the planet. So to maintain the human population at the right number and in perpetual balance with nature, like the Georgia Guidestones, as we mentioned, tells us, written by, you get this R.C. Christian. It can be, Rosicrucian Christian or Roman Catholic Christian, or whatever the pseudonym may be, but it's there and it's written in stone. So while that's the case, eugenics tells us which human beings of this billion or so population, which one of those need to go, and that's the survival of the fittest element. And so, or which members of the human population will be in the group that have to quote unquote die to save not only humanity as the species, but to save the ecosystem that humanity lives in. And so these ideas are carried over to the work of, you get this occultist, a New Age occultist, Alice A. Bailey, whose writings are at the basis of Robert Muller's World Core Curriculum and UNESCO at the United Nations. And so Alice A. Bailey was, the leader of the Theosophical Society that was established as Lucifer Press for the purpose of printing and distributing the society's literature. And so this was around, the 1920s. Due to public outrage, the people were like, hey, Lucifer Press, like, come on. The name was changed to Lucius Press, Ltd. And so Lucius Trust, the parent organization, was initially headquartered at the United Nations Plaza in New York, has over 6,000 members, and is among many of the foundation sponsors of we've already covered, the one world government, this cosmocracy idea.
Shocking.
So we have to understand that, what the elite think about Malthusianism. You remember the quote from Tedeschi, they're using those ideas to kind of shape the world going forward. And they're prominent positions that are making policy not only of nation states, but now international agreements and treaties and laws and things like that. And we mentioned before that it's the NGOs and the CSOs who are the artificial bodies that set up to mimic the administrations within nation states, and it's the corporations that are galvanizing the wealth and putting the flesh on the bones of this next phase, going from the nation state phase to the corporate state phase to the global state phase. And so in the book Education in the New Age, Alice A. Bailey, she says on page 111, 111. Too many of you, for instance, the World War was a supreme disaster. Well, most people would agree with that. An agony to be averted in the future at any cost. I mean, that's what a sane person would think, right? A dire and dreadful happening indicative of the wickedness of man and the incredible blind indifference of God. Now, I mean, we can, in God, King, Father, Friend, we have something different to say there.
Yeah.
But, so she is saying that, you guys are looking at the death of these millions of people via war, and you think it's a bad thing.
As if it was this really bad tragedy, right? Yeah.
Right. And so remember, I think we kind of mentioned in passing before, it was the idea because she's going to put forth this idea of you shouldn't be so worried about the life form, but life itself needs to go on. And there's the analogy of like a surgery. If you're going to cut out the cancer, you have to do some injury to get to the cancer to cut it out. It's better that you injure them in that way to take the cancer out rather than to
the lesser evil idea, right?
Act utilitarianism. And so if we continue to us on the inner side,
so that just shows the esoteric and exoteric, right? Yeah.
There you go. Right, the two doctrine policy. To us on the inner side, the World War was in the nature of a major surgical operation made in an effort to save the patient's life. A violent streptococcal germ, an infection, had menaced the life of humanity, speaking in symbols now, right? So, and the operation was made in order to prolong opportunity and save life, not to save the form, right? And so as we go through here, you get this idea that we need to save life itself, not the form, and they're going to compound this idea as we've mentioned with Madonna before, not everybody makes it to the future, and there's going to be a society that's being prepared to inherit that particular future, and everything else is considered a parasite or a cancer or like she's talking about the war. It's these things are kind of necessary to save the species as a whole and thus save the ecological system of the species.
So already the individual sovereignty is out the window. We're not even talking about it yet. Not to even tie it to a nation state and then take it away. It's just it's gone.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so if we continue here, it says this operation was largely successful. Well, most people wouldn't call this, they would call it a tragedy. They would say that this is largely successful. The germ, to be sure, is not eradicated. Oh, so we're still here. We're still around.
We still have humans there.
And it makes its presence felt in infected areas in the body of humanity. This is good stuff, right? So page 112. Another surgical operation may be necessary, not in order to destroy and end the present civilization, but in order to dissipate the infection and get rid of the fever. You go, wow.
Did Fauci write this for her?
It almost seems as though they were they're in communication, right? So she continues, let us never forget, if a form proves inadequate or too diseased or too crippled for the expression of that purpose, it is from the point of view of the hierarchy. We're going to figure out later that, when we get to the mystery religion stuff, the hierarchy, this is a spiritual hierarchy that she's talking about. It's not human beings on earth. These are the governing bodies in a spiritual sense that are puppeting the people that are in charge of nation states.
Again, whoever she's writing this for, they know exactly what she means, right?
Yeah. And so all of that will come apparent when we do the mystery religion stuff. And so it's no disaster when the form has to go. Death is not a disaster to be feared. The work of the destroyer is not really cruel or undesirable. So she continues, therefore, there is much destruction permitted by the custodians of the plan. Right. Who are these characters? Is it the same as the hierarchy? Well, obviously we'll get to that later. And much evil turned into good. Remember the greater good, lesser evil idea. Because the end is seen from the beginning. Okay, the end justifies the means, right? That idea. And the consciousness is ripe enough in the experience to relinquish the form because of the sensed benefits to be gained. This is true of individuals, of nations, and of races.
Yeah.
And so again, we get this idea that the greater good of humanity we need to reduce the population, and if it happens by World War I or World War II or World War III, it's not a big deal because a major surgical operation made in an effort to save the patient's life and not the specific life form. Though as you mentioned, it's not really the individual that's important, and it's not really your rights that are important. So this is the ideology that's driving the dissolving of the nation states, because if you've already made these distinctions within your mind, it's easy now to now put the rational justifications for, well, this is for the greater good.
Yeah. If you have to lose a leg to save your life, you'll be in a different form, but you'll have your life. That's what we're trying to do.
Right. And so we get to the next piece. The form proves inadequate, as she said, or too diseased or too crippled for the expression of that purpose. From that point of view of the hierarchy, it's no disaster when this form has to go. And this sounds a lot like Aleister Crowley in his book, The Book of the Law. Now, the background behind this character, he's the self-proclaimed wickedest man on the earth. And so he says in his book on page 7, we have nothing with the outcast and the unfit. Let them die in their misery, for they feel not. Compassion is the vice of kings. Step down the wretched and the weak. This is the law of the strong. This is the law and the joy of the world. And so he also says in Magic in Theory and Practice, page 54, when it becomes necessary to utter a word, the whole planet must be bathed in blood before man is ready to accept the law of Telema. The great war must be fought. And so you get this idea. Depopulation will continue, or will include current living human beings, as well as preventing future human beings from entering the timeline. And so you get this movement towards abortion, contraception, family planning, selective breeding, one-child policy, and you can put a whole laundry list of things that are entangled with this. And so they believe that we need to, create the most fit human stock. That's eugenics. That is manageable going forward based on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so this will kind of will make this transition from, there's this ideology that's driving this whole, it's the mechanism behind the scenes, putting the fuel on the fire. And then you're going to get an outbreak of policies around this that, all the member states of the United Nations will then latch onto.
And luckily they gave us the dates, right? 2030. So it's coming up.
Yeah. So, and so now this stock, as we shall see, will be selectively bred to serve the purpose of the final global state, to be transhuman, fused with technology, or biologically upgraded with technology from DNA and genes, implanted, or perhaps this wearable tech or implanted tech. And so it'll be enlightened. This is going to get us into the mystery religion stuff, because not only you're going to equip the body to do certain things, you're going to equip the mind, or the spiritual aspect of these people. So they'll be initiated via rites and rituals included in this collective idea. So you get the hive mind. This is why you'll see a lot of the symbology that's used. Things like the beehive is always used as an occultic symbol. And then you'll get this idea that the population will be controlled. And I don't really like the whole idea of microchip, because there's so much stuff that's bad data associated with it. But the general concept hold, microchipped population, or wired into this global smart grid and the smart cities. And because later on we'll discover, either if we get to it in this podcast or the next, this idea that everybody will be herded into these city centers, and this is the move to get everybody, the population reduced and on a social credit score. Not only that, but a universal basic income. But not only that, you're going to get this idea that all of this stuff is going to be implemented under different names, and when people kind of get hip to this, these guys have their way of describing the people that are kind of like, without using, awakening to these sorts of ideas. And then they have a counter conspiratorial team, and it's interesting because that information is old, but we're seeing the fruition of that today with the Ministry of Truth and the Bureau of Disinformation. And so eugenics and Malthusianism were deeply linked and devised by this English woman, Margaret Sanger, who coined the phrase birth control, which then led to Planned Parenthood, and then family planning, which had this zero to do with the things that are kind of like bogging it down, like women's rights. Like as today, they're finding it difficult to even define what a woman is.
Yeah, but they have rights. That's for sure.
But they have these rights. And this is the stuff that's normally attached to all of those things. So you'll dip into all the stuff that's kind of like muddying the waters. And so it has everything to do with the elite wanting a future for their inheritance, which they see as the entire earth, unvarnished by the useless eaters, which would be you and I, right? But since it was packaged in this, the garb of women's rights, you'll get this idea that it'll be swallowed hook, line, and sinker. I think that's good for now. We'll leave it off here. We'll pick up the rest of this on the other side.
Yeah.
And so next we'll talk about, how do you get the world to accept the fact that they need to kill not only themselves but their children in order to make room for the quote-unquote most fit of the population to survive in this new world order thing, right? So, so we'll pick that up after the break. Yeah.
So we're trying like a new format, maybe not new format, just keep them a little bit shorter.
Yeah.
Just to looking at the analytics and stuff like that, we want to adjust, make it the best possible podcast, so people get to see all the way through.
Yeah.
If it's too long, sometimes people drop off, which we understand. Nobody has like a hour, 2 hours, and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
The information is really good, and we want to make sure that you stayed all the way to the back, to the end, and watched it. And if you did, thank you very much. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And then again, where they can go to support us.
Yeah, so if you want to support us, you can go to theiconiclabel.com. You can get your hoodies, your hats, and your T-shirts, or buy package deals. You can support us at patreon.com/theiconicpodcast if you want to support us financially. And then always like, subscribe, share, comment. All the engagement absolutely helps.
Yeah. Also, what we'll do, probably some of the books that you recommended, I'll try to find them on Amazon, maybe leave an affiliate link and all that, if anybody wants to go and buy them, or any other way that you get your books, if it's an auto book or whatever. And I think that's it.
That's it. Thanks, guys, for joining us.